So somebody explain time.
Eric, you're up.
Give him a second. Give him a second. Another pun. Anyone?
That's pretty good. I was,
Maybe we should. How about outer sense versus inner sense? We could talk about that. Seems like a reasonable place to start. I'm tempted to want to talk about subjective or transcendental subjectivity versus empirical subjectivity, but maybe we don't need to talk about that. I don't know.
yeah, at
So,
some point tonight, I would like to, when we discuss time, inner sense, external pattern recognition for objectivity, how that kind of ties into individuation, because that one a little tricky for me.
I don't know if, I mean, Kant talks about what I means, but you mean individuation as in what differentiates particular people from one another?
Right, right. Not so much the self-consciousness encompassing, but like how you individuate is like the differentiation of others when you have this inner experience. Like it seems like he's kind of implying that it's in some aspect of like your experience of time and inner sense, but I'm not sure, Nevin. I don't know.
I don't know if he even, Eric, does he ever deal with that topic?
Um, I'm not quite sure that I follow the question,
What
but
individuates one person from another?
the I that he's dropping a reference to here, the I as such is going to be made more explicit in the next section in the transcendental logic, specifically the synthetic unity of a perception. So this is a perception, right? That
So it's like
reflecting
the
on reflecting back on the I that's thinking, the I thinking itself.
okay, so through the I thinking itself, as we elaborate a little bit more further down the road, we're going to see these like this framework of structural changes through time in space that kind of like formulate or represent the individuation of being.
But I don't think he's so much dealing with like what makes me Nevitt and what makes you Joseph. He's not well, maybe we shouldn't worry about it too much since we haven't got there yet. But
Yeah, I don't know.
it's more about why am I able to assign my experiences to me? Why am
Right.
I able to say why can I say the word I in a meaningful way? It's more something along those lines. But
It
Exactly.
is
That would be the more transcendental line, right? As opposed to what makes you Nevitt and what makes Joseph Joseph is more of an empirical question about personhood.
Right, and
And
and I
what he's concerned with here is transcendental conditions of experience.
okay. Okay.
that
or and
apply to human beings as such.
right, and like I just want to like Eric, if I'm understanding correctly, right? I mean, it feels like the yeah, like that. That's why I feel like I kind of got you when you were like kind of initial. I mean, I felt I agreed with you. I had a similar sentiment. You were when the question itself was kind of confusing because like I guess I kind of I might maybe incorrectly, but I kind of relegated to like this sort of like what makes you you sort of stuff. At least for now, like on into a it's like well, it could be anything. It could be just you wake up and you see the same driver's license in your wallet or something. Just doesn't matter. Like whatever it is that makes you whatever it doesn't matter. It's empirical. It's not like germane as of right now. And in fact, I mean, I guess you know you might get into how you deal with your empirical circumstances like that when you're dealing with like your practical reason. You know,
But well, like
but
looking at my driver's license yesterday, like I'm if I'm understanding Eric correctly, like this individuation aspect is really like a temporal succession of empirical events that we have pattern recognition through, but I don't want to like get ahead of that. Like it's like I don't know. If it's dread, like Heidegger, at least we know what makes me scared, which is this.
Well, I like I said, let's focus on the time
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm
first, since
sorry.
as Eric said, that stuff's going to come up later. Um, so I'm happy, if anybody has a place to start. Again, the question that pops into my mind is trying to make sure we understand the distinction between outer sense and inner sense, and the form of outer sense versus the form of inner sense. So what is outer sense? What is inner sense? What's the difference between the two? Well, we have two Carmens.
I mean, it seems by the way he's posed things in the time section that he would say, maybe this is incorrect, that since time is where all appearances are grounded in our sense of time, then our outer sense, and I want to say, sorry, I was getting a phone call. I want to say that he might even explicitly mention the reliance of the outer on the inner, right? So it's ultimately through one that we are able to do the other, by maybe misspeaking.
So just exactly like what is outer sense and what is inner sense, or what's the difference between those two?
I guess I took inner sense as to be like relative, like not to get too Wittgensteinian, but like the Beatle, like feelings or like emotions or states of being of where I am in my like succession of events and time, but like time provides the necessary schema or framework for me to even have the possibility of experiencing objects in space. So it's kind of like necessary for that. So I guess outer sense is like the spatial temporal lenses that I use to perceive objects as they appear to me through like sensibility. But I never really access the thing in of itself. And like inner sense is like my own personal like feelings, emotions, thoughts. I don't know if that's right.
I think that's really, I just thought, right. And I think you put it in better words, like more explicit terms. And I feel like, kind of, that's sort of almost this kind of like dumb guy almost I have of it. It's like,
I
oh,
am
what's intersection?
extremely dumb. Don't worry. I did it time. We are literally 18 minutes into it. I will not let you down.
Good. I'm got you. Okay, brothers in arms in that regard. But I just thought, it's like inner sense and outer sense. I guess I just was like, well, what's the in answer? My immediate thought of the answer to the question, what's the difference between inner sense and outer sense, and what's the form of inner sense and the form of outer sense? The form of inner sense is time, and outer sense is space. That's the forms. Outer sense is my sensibility this way at objects that I'm not sure if they're there or what they are. It's just stuff. And then my inner sense is when I kind of do it backwards, kind of inside, and I think about I feel shitty or I'm stupid or I have whatever these I'm ugly, whatever, or I feel something or I think I'm horny or whatever. I'm just having some sort of experience that is not being impinged upon my sensory organs from outside. That's you know what I mean? And I think the like yeah, that's anyway, yeah.
I think the terms that I found helpful is simultaneous versus sequential. Like the inner being sequential, already presupposing time, whereas simultaneity means that space is always space. We're not thinking about that temporally. So yeah, the inner being the sequential. I'm tempted to say subjective, but space is also subjective. We experience space through time as subject, whereas object, I guess what Kant would say in the noumenal sense, is simultaneous and always there. So if you kind of negate the time aspect in the abstract.
That's why
space.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was kind of running out of steam there.
That's why, and again, I don't know, maybe it's too early to do this, but distinction between transcendental subjectivity and empirical subjectivity, because when Kant says, I mean, this is one reason why it's so confusing when he says all this stuff is subjective. He's not referring to subjectivity in the sense of inner sense. In other words, in the sense of I experience my own consciousness. I have thoughts. I have feelings. I make choices. That's all happening inside my mind, as it were, as opposed to like Hunter said, out there, the five senses. So it's like the five senses, outer sense, and then but time and space are not subjective they are not part of my inner sense. They are subjective in a transcendental way, not in an empirical way. And so my inner consciousness, my thoughts, my feelings, my subjective experiences that are not accessible to anyone else outside my own mind, that's not where time and space come from. That's empirical for Kant. I mean, empirical for Kant includes, is that right, Eric? That he, yeah, I have empirical consciousness, which is what I experience as my inner mental states. And then I have empirical experience in the outer sense, but those are both empirical, so not transcendental. And so in time and space, they're not subjective in that in that empirical sense. In other words, they're not constituted by they're not constituted by the same kind of mind that I experience as having thoughts and feelings and stuff. They're constituted by a kind of subjectivity that in a sense is behind all that. And so that's why, like it's tempting to say, like Ed was kind of suggesting earlier, that all this stuff is subjective. Well, it depends on what you mean by subjective, because, and here, I'm following, I'm just repeating what I've heard from Eric and from, contemporary scholars, but particularly Beiser, but Kant is trying to actually find a very solid ground for objectivity. That's what he wants to do in support of Newtonian physics, among other things. So time and space are not subjective in the sense that I have an experience of time and you have an experience of time, and they could be completely different. Not what he means.
Yeah, not in this sense, right? I mean, we can talk about different empirical experiences, different experiences of time as a psychological,
Oh,
but that's not the transcendental, right? But more to the point, right? In order for you to have any inner consciousness whatsoever, in order for you to think, oh, I'm angry, oh, I'm less angry, oh, I'm more angry, you already presuppose time. Right? Time is the condition for the possibility of any inner consciousness. I can't imagine inner consciousness without it being temporal.
no, the fact that I can imagine a triangle and then imagine a circle, there's a change there. And that's why, and I don't have the empirical evidence to support this, but that's why when I was talking to Tori that last time, and I was, talking about being in a sensory deprivation tank, I can't really support this empirically, but my suspicion is, even if if your outer sense was somehow cut off, and I don't even know if that's completely possible, but if you weren't having any input from your five senses, I think you would still have a sense of time, because again, you can count. There you go. 1, 2, 3. You don't have to have anything happening in your senses for you to be able to count. And that doesn't mean that time is generated by my inner sense, but like what Eric says, it means my ability to count presupposes already that there is a temporal context to my consciousness.
Even in losing track of time, there's still a lingering sense of time, right? Like if you cut off, like they're saying, Nevitt, from all the senses, and you start going crazy, there's still an underlying sense of time, like how much time has passed, and that might even be a source of panic.
Or even, I'm going crazy. What does that imply? Well, it implies you didn't feel crazy and now you feel crazy.
I'm curious to how this can detach from the subject though, right? Because inner sense, I want to say, implies a subjectivity to it. I understand that I understand what you were saying earlier, Nevitt, but I am kind of curious to how we could separate this inner sense from just subject, or if that's even something that's necessary.
Well, again, there's two types of subjectivity, so it's very confusing. But like Eric said, and I can't. You can have different subjective experiences of time. You know, like my sense of time and the sense of time of a child is probably very different. You know, I experience time as going really, really fast, and the child, depending on what's happening when he's sitting in a classroom, subjectively experiences time as going really slow. But there, in spite of that, that psychological experience, which is subjective, there is underlying that the capacity for having a temporal experience at all, having any kind of temporal experience. And that is not, that is transcendentally subjective because it's not something that my psychology generates. It's something that my experience, my psychological experience of time presupposes already that there is a sort of framework of time that I can experience subjectively, or subjectively in the empirical sense.
I'm not sure that we can detach inner sense from subjectivity, or even outer sense for that matter, because he's saying that it's always how things appear to me, right? Whether inner or outer. If I'm if I see the desk, it's how the desk appears to me. If I feel a certain way, or if I imagine the desk, it's how that appearance is for me, for the subject.
There's certain features of the appearance that are going to be universal for every finite rational mind. So I might subjectively, you know, empirically experience the thing as let's say that we're looking at it under different lighting conditions. Like you have a light behind you, and so you see maybe this ball is bright red, whereas I'm on the other side and I see it as sort of a dusky red or something. So those are very different, and so we're going to have the experience of that appearance. It's going to be subjectively different in terms of empirical subjectivity, but the appearance, and Kant still calls it an appearance, the structure of the appearance, its its temporal and spatial situatedness, its geometric features, those are subjective in a transcendental sense, but not in an empirical sense. So I'm pretty confident he would say, no, we are going to experience those kinds of features exactly the same way. And nevertheless, he's still going to call that an appearance, which, you know, is always a difficult word to, I don't know what other word he could have used, but
I don't want to get this incorrectly, but as far as like transcendental subject, could we say like the objectivity of experience?
So I would back up a bit and then yes. I mean it's through a careful consideration of transcendental subject that we get to the objectivity in experience. So you had to go back to what Mario said. I just will affirm, right? Following the Kantian turn or the Copernican turn, we don't get away from subjectivity. Right? That was the paradigm of metaphysics and epistemology prior to Kant, right? Like apart from our subjective conditions, can we know God exists? Apart from our subjective conditions, can we say that nature, as Newton describes it, is lawful? Right? In itself. If we can get away from the subject, can we prove objectivity? And Kant is, again, Kant is, well, if we stick with the empirical subject, then no. We have to have a subject. This is a theory about knowing, a subject knowing an object. right? So you're gonna have a subject, but we're not going to eliminate the subject. In fact, we're gonna drill down on this subject. Beneath the empirical subject is a transcendental subject that we can say certain things about that lead us to objectivity via the a priori, the necessary, and the universalizable.
Yeah, like last time we saw him argue that geometry is, is has a transcendental, I don't know, foundation is not the right word. But anyways, given that geometry emerges from our spatial intuition, and that space, the transcendental, yeah, I never know the right words to use, but the transcendental character of space means that we all experience space, the structure of space in the same way. Again, this is part of what he's trying to explain how we get synthetic a priori truths. And so the truths of geometry are not analytic, they're synthetic. Again, like the statement, the shortest distance between two straight lines or between 2 points in a Euclidean plane is a straight line. There's nothing analytic about that. There's nothing about the definition of point, the definition of line, or any of that from which you can deduce that truth. But we know it's true. Well, how do we know it's true, even though it's synthetic? Well, because it emerges from the transcendental structure of space, which is always already, to use a later term, always already in place simply for us to have any experience at all. And so as a result, like Hume has a hard time explaining why geometry is universal, why it's a priori, why the truths of geometry a priori. He struggles with that one. He comes up with an answer, but at least from my way of thinking, it's not very satisfactory. And Kant's like, I can tell you why. I can tell you why the truths of geometry are not contingent in any sense. They're not dependent on who thought them up, where you were in the world, what historical epoch you're in, where you are in the universe. They just are what they are. And the reason they are that way is because they emerge from the transcendental structure of space. And so as a result, we will all experience the structure of space, its geometricity and other features exactly the same. And it's why you can do mathematical physics and why it's successful. And then time, frankly, I have a lot harder time with time. But it's a similar kind of a thing. That the possibility of experiencing time is built into the way our minds process the world, and that is transcendentally subjective, but empirically objective.
Yeah, didn't he? I can't remember what section he mentioned, but it was like he was like, "This is what makes synthetic a priori even a possibility." Like,
Yes.
the fact that we have this. It's kind of like that's how I viewed the transcendental. And is it safe to assume that like he's making a distinction between the transcendental and metaphysical? Because it seems like he is.
Yes. It's especially in relation to the traditional metaphysics. It's, if you like, after Kant, it's a refinement of we can talk about metaphysics with the transcendental after the transcendental turn. But right now he's not talking about like a metaphysics of nature. He's talking about the conditions of possibility for a subject to know an object.
Okay, thank you.
I really appreciate his refutation of more like empirical justifications of these mathematical truths, right? Which is something you were alluding to earlier, probably with I don't know that Hume himself said that, but what I'm saying is people were grappling with that. And he thinks it's unacceptable to, do this sort of nominalist thing of like, well, we know that we can derive these truths about trees or whatever because this tree is behaving that way. And then let's move on to the next one. It's like you actually are never going to be able to, I think the word he uses is alterations. You won't actually be able to perceive that on a tree to tree basis or a whatever shape to whatever shape basis. I thought that was great and it was satisfying. But I know that there are at least I remember there was a mention in the chat last time about the whole 7+5 thing and how I think it's a 20th century mathematician later disproved that. But I'm ignorant of what that exercise actually was and did and said.
Like Gödel
I'm
is
not
in,
sure that it actually countered Kant's proposition here.
I mean, are you talking about Gödel's incompleteness theorem?
I don't recall the mathematician, honestly.
I don't even know if I'm saying his name right.
Well, I think last time maybe we were talking about non-Euclidean geometry. Is that what you were thinking of? Yeah, there was a couple of I can't remember the guy's name. Maybe Torino's Bolai or something. And then another guy, whose name I also don't remember, that both developed forms of non-Euclidean geometry. And those, oh, Riemann, and those, yeah. So, and those were considered possible challenges to Kant because Kant, if space is a form of intuition, that then the reason space is the form of outer intuition is because we experience everything in space, and then from that he argues that we have these synthetic a priori uh, truths of geometry that are implicated in that structure of space, but our intuitions along that line are Euclidean. So when I imagine space, just things like the fifth postulate again. If I say you have two lines that are straight and you cross them and go on forever and you cross them with a third line such that the interior angles add up to two right angles, what do you know? Well, you know those two lines never meet. And that's a Euclidean intuition. And and non-Euclidean geometry violates that principle and other principles of Euclidean geometry. And so the challenge was, well, if our if the fundamental structure of space is at least transcendentally subjective, not empirically, but transcendentally subjective, and yet our basic intuition of space is Euclidean, isn't that a problem if we discover that the basic structure of space is not Euclidean, which is when non-Euclidean geometry developed, it did not develop for any application. It developed as an abstract field of mathematics. It wasn't until, as far as I know, Einstein shows up and they're like, oh my God, this weird non-Euclidean geometry turns out to be really useful for talking about relativistic space. But the non-Euclidean geometry was already a challenge to Kant even before that. But I don't know enough about. I think there's still arguments today as to whether non-Euclidean geometries and the non-Euclidean character of relativistic space, whether or not how much of a challenge those are to Kant. I think there's disagreement about that, and I don't know enough to have a firm opinion.
Well, wouldn't non-Euclidean geometry still be referencing space, which is what any geometry would just be built on? and that's what's actually transcendental for Kant and kind of what matters.
I take it that the issue is that if you change just one postulate in your definition of space, you can wind up with a very different kind of working understanding of space itself. So it's not undermining to the fact that there can be space as a necessary condition for making sense of the world. But it is undermining in the sense potentially that we may not have or operate under the same definition of space. I
Or,
think.
or the space. I mean, if I think Kant, I'm thinking Kant would say space really is Euclidean. It really is because it's the form of our outer intuition. Well, now, it doesn't seem like space really is Euclidean. Space is really weird and non-Euclidean. But then, as Joey points out in the chat, there may be other ways of finessing that problem that maybe save Kant. But I don't, I'm sympathetic. I just don't know.
Um, I wanted to just also say that I think in agreement with what Joey's putting down and what you're, Nevitt, kind of saying at the end there, is that I just wanted to potentially, to quote Eric, maybe just push back on one single word that Tori used. And I'm not saying, Tori, you were advancing a position at all. I just wanted to clarify, actually. It's not really, so I'm not pushing back against you, I'm trying to clarify, I think, a word. And it was like, you were saying, we could have potentially different definitions of space. I would replace that word with different understandings of space, rather, because like the definition of space is the form of outer sense. It's where stuff happens. You know what I mean? It's the outer. It's space. You know what I mean? So I think he's really adamant that like that's it. That's the real deal. That's the one, whether it's Euclidean or whatever, or upside down or turned around or, circuitous or has sinuosities to it, whatever, doesn't really matter. Maybe you think so, maybe I think so, but it's like time. It's like Nevik's example with time. I feel like my time is disappearing like the sand in the hourglass, and I'm racing towards my own demise. Whereas the student feels like this is like an infinite torture chamber that I have somehow extended their life indefinitely in through my abuse of time, through my wizardry, my chronomancy. Different understandings of time, but same definition as to what it is. It's the, you know, it's the flow of stuff. I don't know what, it's the Kant would say the form of inner sense. So, yeah.
So one thing that I have I didn't find the passage where he says this, but maybe I don't know, maybe I should have shut up until I found it. But what a difficulty I have is I mean it kind of makes sense to me that space is the form of outer intuition and that time is the form of inner intuition. That makes some basic sense, but then obviously we experience the outer world as temporal. And he explains that someplace in here, where even though time is the inner form, the form of inner sensibility, nevertheless, that's why we experience, the sensory world temporally. And I didn't really understand that argument. See if I can find that.
Was it when he was talking about relations? And he's, kind of talking about the system of, or the relations that we find objects in, like here versus there, um, and being situated in motion as well. So kind of that overlap is there.
Yeah, that I think that's where they overlap is things like change and motion. But I just have a hard time. I mean, it's obviously true. So because I experience things happening in the world in time, but I'm having a hard time understanding the theoretical basis. You know, how is he explaining that? That I don't merely experience my, you know, like my thoughts happening in time, which I do, but I also experience like my hand waving around in time. Um, I don't quite really understand. I don't understand the theoretical answer to that question.
I guess
Okay.
I was kind of thinking about it in terms of the changes that we observe in the object and thinking about the object prior to the change. So if I drop my bottle, to use a class favorite, if I drop my bottle and it gets dinged and it has a dent in it now, I can think about it prior to that ding. So it's in time as well as in space.
I mean, that kind of makes sense, but I must be thinking something fundamentally wrong here, but there you go. Um, but you know, it's not like I see a bottle that's undented, and then I see a bottle that's dented, and that inside my mind, I think, oh, there was a change. I see a bottle moving, and that appears to be in outer sense. So I see, I experience motion, it seems to me, in my outer sense, because I experience things moving, things changing. And so if space is the form of, or time is the form only of inner intuition, why is it that I experience physical things temporally? I guess that's why, maybe I'm just missing something basic. Here's a passage. This is at A34, um, page 88 in the Pluhar, but A34, it's C under conclusions from these concepts, section 6. So he's got A, B, and C. He said, so maybe this is the passage I was thinking of, it has a big question mark by it. Time is the formal a priori condition of all appearances generally. Space is the pure form of all outer appearances. As such, it is limited as a priori condition just to outer appearances. But all presentations, whether or not they have outer things as their objects, do in themselves, as determinations of the mind, belong to our inner state. And this inner state is subject to the formal condition of inner intuition and hence to the condition of time. Therefore, time is an a priori condition of all appearances generally. It is the direct condition of inner appearances of our souls, and precisely thereby also indirectly a condition of outer appearances. If I can say a priori that all outer appearances are in space and are determined a priori according to spatial relations, then the principle of inner sense allows me to say quite universally that all appearances generally, that is, all objects of the senses, the outer sense, are at the same time and stand necessarily in relation of time. I mean, I understand the words, but I don't really understand like this indirectly. I don't, anyway, again, maybe I'm just missing something obvious, but I'm having
That
trouble.
paragraph, I'm kind of fried because I read a lot of this today already and I'm having trouble thinking, but I guess I liked it when I read it because I put a star next to that one and a big question mark next to the one right after it. But I was thinking of it in the sense of, I think Mario was saying something about this earlier. Someone was that time and space like work together in tandem. So it's kind of like an inhale and an exhale, you know, like you can't have one without the other. And so yeah, the things are moving in space, but the only reason that we can process the fact that anything has changed in space is because we have that innate understanding of time. if that makes sense. That's what I got from it, at least.
Well, can I ask a sideways question? Because I've been trying to never when I'm not sure that I need to have a sense of time to have an understanding. Let's say you didn't move. Yeah, you didn't move forward, backward within your screen. But and I don't know why I would think I know this, but what I am seeing as an appearance of Nevitt, you're in front of the wall behind you. There's a recess in the wall that has some kind of table that has something on top of it, and then there's a shelf above that. I mean, think of the words behind, above, in front of. Those are all spatial words, right? And the physical distribution of the different, begging your pardon for saying, objects, I think I can have a sense of spatial differentiation without necessarily having to invoke time. But I hesitate because I'm not saying that that's what Kant was meaning by that. But when you were talking, that's just what hit me in the face, in a way, with looking at everything in your room.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I can, or it seems like I can have an understanding of space absent time, at least abstractly, because I can imagine, I could see a room where nothing's appears to be changing, or I can imagine something like some object that's not changing. But the problem that I have is that I also like right now, you're seeing me in a spatial structure, but you're also hearing my words temporally. And it appears to me that temporality is a function of my outer sense because it's happening in my senses, right? Like I'm literally seeing my lips move, I'm seeing my head move. And so I'm having my sensory experiences appear to be temporal. But he says that no, time is the form of inner intuition, not outer intuition, but indirectly. Uh, apparently the reason that I experience things happening in space as happening in time, it has something to do with this indirectly in that paragraph, and I don't get that.
The way I would put it roughly is like this. If we think about the phrase a stream of consciousness, that stream of consciousness already implies temporality. And you can imagine Joyce's writing from a character stream of consciousness. We're jumping back and forth between inner states and outer states. So the stream of consciousness can encompass both inner states and outer states. But to report on any outer states, it's going to happen within a stream of consciousness. This temporality is already presupposed. When you imagine a spatial world of external objects outside of you, you do that within your stream of consciousness. And if you want to imagine space sans time, you can, but this is now a derivative function by placing conceptual limits on your temporality, on your already existing stream of consciousness. You have to kind of perform an operation of freezing a moment within the stream in order to talk about space apart from time. And this is already kind of a work, a derivative kind of thing. Before you can do any of that, you're already experiencing everything external already within a temporal inner flow.
So then why isn't both time and space the form of outer intuition then?
Well, he says space has to do with all appearances, whereas time has to do with all appearances, where space has to do only with outer appearances.
Right.
But he also says that time is the form of inner intuition and space is the, like Joey said, if you look at paragraph B, he's emphasizing time is the form of inner intuition. The very next paragraph, he says, but time actually applies to all appearances, inner or outer. That's the transition I'm missing here.
Well, I think this is kind of what I was confused about with the subjective thing with time, right? Because inner kind of implies again, subject is probably the wrong word. But when it comes to appearances, it almost seems like he's saying that there's kind of a priority to it. He doesn't say that necessarily, but just the fact alone that it has to do with all appearances, right? So inner sense encompasses outer sense, right? Would that be correct to say? And as far as like time encompasses all appearance, including outer sense.
That feels like where my mind wants to take it in reading B and C together and then hearing some of the stuff y'all have said. And like Mario put it in the chat around memory, something about how like my memory of the very previous moment is kind of it's right there.
There's going to be something coming up in terms of successive moments of the subject forming judgments. But that, so something about memory is implied, and then duration, which Bergson will expand, right? But it's already kind of in a embryonic form here in Kant. But again, this is going to come when we get to the synthetic unity of a perception. There's an I that thinks anything, and then there is a successive moments of I thinking this, I think that. And you have to have these successive moments for the whole package to work. But we'll get there.
Will that synthetic unity be the way that he approaches like the traditional aspect of rationalism? Since it seems like in this part, like there's a pretty significant what he proposes solution to the problem of causation by Hume.
So I think the synthetic unity of a perception is mostly trying to explain. I mean, in the abstract, I don't say, wow, lots of experiences. I say, I have an experience of this and that. And so what is it that makes it possible for me to attribute this bunch of experiences to my experience? Like why is, why, I mean, you could imagine a kind of consciousness that I don't even know if it would count as, Kant might not even call it as a kind of consciousness, but a kind of awareness where there was just awareness of a lot of shit happening. And maybe even, I mean, actually, this is kind of the way I read Hume. It's like, I don't have any experience of a self. I just experience shit happening. It's just, I experience lots of stuff. And then Kant going, really? No, you don't. You don't have an experience of lots of shit happening. You have an experience of you having an experience. And at least I think that's one way I think about the transcendental unity of a perception. It's, Hume says, I don't experience any constant self. And Kant's like, yeah, I don't either. You're right. But there's got to be something or some mechanism by which this manifold of experience is unified into a single experience. That's, again, I guess, I'm probably spending too much time on it, but that's the way I read that.
Yeah, in order for you to experience shit happening, there has to be a you experiencing shit happening.
Yeah.
Right. And in order for that to make any sense and be communicable even to yourself, it happens, over successive moments, right? Not in a flash and then gone. Like a flash of consciousness and then gone, right?
I wanted to ask you, because I had some problem with these parts among a lot of other parts, but this one specifically. So I'm not sure if I'm going to use the correct terminology, but so this inner sense gives us this stream of kind of changing experiences, but what unifies it all, like all the changes of all these changing inner states is, I think it calls it a perception, but I'm not sure. So our inner experience is a temporal succession, but what holds it all together is this, right? But what I'm not, I didn't understand if Kant says, thinks that a perception is an a priori intuition, like space and time, or is something different. Because it from what I understood, we experience ourselves as this unified subject over time, and this unity is not given by experience. So we must already have it presupposed.
And it's not a matter of intuition. That's why it's in the next section after the aesthetic.
So it's a priori intuition.
It is not an a priori intuition. It is a logical function more than an intuition. It's a logical function. The apercept, when we get to it, you'll see it's not, we don't intuit a self persisting beneath all our experiences. But logically, there must be a persisting self for us to have experiences. So it's a matter of a logical deduction rather than an intuition. I wanted to, kind of reframe earlier, the relationship between, well, we have intuition, right? He says a lot about intuition in this chapter, right? The mode by which a subject comes to know an object, right? The object is not the subject, so that the subject has to have some relationship to the object, right? This is an intuition. Yeah. And then for us, we are the kind of creatures who have to have sensible intuition, not intellectual intuition, right? And then the forms of our sensibility being space and time. Space is how we intuit things that are outside of us, like Hunter was doing earlier, right? Anything that's really not me, is belonging to the external world, must come to me at least, through the form of space. And anything that is me, I must intuit with my inner sense, and that has to be temporal. And then ultimately, all of our outer experience is also brought within to this stream of consciousness. So it will always be like commensurable to time. Even as outer, it's spatial, but when it is experienced in my consciousness, it must be also temporalized.
I really like that, what you said earlier. So it would be because it's in my stream of consciousness.
Okay. I guess that's like kind of why I was asking about individuation earlier, is because like the inner and outer, like what am I looking for? Like on 94, he says like that there's two things that stuck out to me. One was 92, and then on 94, the time and space are accordingly two sources of cognition, and from these sources we draw a priori different synthetic cognitions. And then on 94, he ends it, before going into the transcendental aesthetic, that for time itself does not change, rather what changes is something that is in time, I have underlined, throughout the concept of change. Therefore, the concept of change requires the perception of some existence in the succession of its determination. Hence, it requires experience. So it's like the component of time that is inner allows us to even have, it does, what's the word I'm looking for? The component of inner sense of time of the way I experience reality doesn't really determine how I experience, but the framework of what I experience. And then it is an outer objective experience through time, that scaffolding of what allows me to even interact with a representation of the thing in and of itself. And that pattern recognition and succession of the I in that inner experience kind of allows me to individuate and form who I am. Would that be correct?
And the unity of a self is already, if you like, guaranteed when you analyze what it means to have any coherent experience. But then there's more, that would be a transcendental ego, the transcendental self, right? But most of the time we're talking about knowing who you are and the persistence of a personal identity. This is primarily empirical.
I guess that's why I was asking about Descartes earlier, because it's almost like he's taking the individuation of cogito ergo sum and kind of like setting the framework to solve that through an outer objective scaffolding experience of what time is in space, but then through like the transcendental aspect of time, he almost is trying to present a solution for the causality problem presented by Hume.
He's gonna deal. He is gonna try to solve Hume's causality problem, but that's later. Yeah.
Yeah. So, to kind of, he's also going to deal directly with Descartes and the cogito later, but that's the amphiboles. I don't know. My favorite section of the Critique of Pure Reason is when we get to the Transcendental Dialectic, and he takes issue with Descartes there. But to kind of back up and go, I think Tori posed the question on the Discord, right? Why, something about synthetic a priori truths, like how are they even not possible, right? This is Kant's way of framing, like, in the first case, how do we take geometry to be true? From my understanding from the ancient Greeks and others, they had different explanations for understanding geometry to be true, not couching it in terms of synthetic a priori truths, but more about the insight of reason, and reason being the fundamental fabric of the cosmos. And they have a different narrative for how geometry is true, a narrative that doesn't quite hold up in the modern era. It's kind of starting to fray a bit. So he's resetting the question. How can we take these truths of geometry to be true? But more importantly, because Hume problematized causation, how can we take nature to be lawful? That seems to be a synthetic a priori truth. Nature is lawful. That seems to be presupposed in everything Newton and Galileo did. But after reading Hume, how is anybody justified in saying that nature is lawful, right? So he wants to prove that we can be justified in saying that this synthetic a priori truth, nature is lawful, which is a precondition of the natural sciences as far as Kant understands it. Like, how is that even justified? How is that statement possible after Hume? This first section, the transcendental aesthetic, gives us the armaments to answer questions about the synthetic a priori truths of geometry and arithmetic. The next section, the transcendental logic, will give us an insight into the faculty of the understanding. And this will give us the means for grounding synthetic a priori truths of nature. So we have the synthetic a priori truths of math, and we have the synthetic a priori truths of nature in the understanding. And then the jazzy part at the end, when we get to the transcendental dialectic, is this attempt to form synthetic a priori truths in metaphysics, using reason, proclaiming on the nature of God, freedom in the soul. That's a whole nother enterprise now, and things will change, right? So the picture we get in the aesthetic is this is how math is true and universal. The picture we get in the transcendental logic is this is how natural sciences are true and universal. And then the picture we get in the transcendental dialectic is, and this is why it gets dicey when we try to proclaim about the existence of God, a la Anselm and things like that.
What I find interesting is that even in the analytical tradition, I'm wondering how much was influenced by the Kantian definition of intuition, because there's various aspects of intuition that seem to borrow very heavily from the analytical schools that are defined almost to be Kantian in a way. I mean, I'm sure there's different iterations, but there's a lot of similarities.
Well, everybody was influenced by Kant. I mean, remember Kant came before those guys.
Incorrect. Plato, Greeks, all the way. No.
A lot of what drove the early generation of analytic philosophers was a rejection of Hegel. And because of the complex relationship between Kant and Hegel, Kant is an easy person to kind of use to kind of go, okay, maybe Hegel is woo-woo land, but if we draw a couple steps back, we find ourselves in Kant territory, and it's much firmer. So you'll find among a lot of analytic philosophers, they may not be transcendental idealists. They may think that Kant was a bit woo-woo because they were mistaught, but there's still a lot, they will acknowledge a lot of their tradition. And I mean, analytic philosophy still has a lot to do with necessary and sufficient causes, a priori, empirical distinction. There's a whole lot in the analytic tradition that traces to Kant through Hume and Kant. In fact, I would say a good chunk of the analytic tradition kind of just goes Hume, but it just springs away from Hume, and a good chunk of it kind of goes through Hume and Kant. But what they all agree is that that Hegel's hard and hurts your brain, and maybe shouldn't read it. But that, again, I'm not an analytic, so I'm not endorsing that view.
Just to, maybe I shouldn't repeat the point, but just to reemphasize what Eric was saying, if you ask Plato, so it does appear, excuse me, to use Kant's language, that geometric propositions are synthetic and are a priori synthetic. And Plato, and if you ask Plato why that's the case, he says, well, because there are these timeless eternal forms that don't exist in the domain of space and time at all. And that's why they're eternal and changeless, because they're not conditioned by space or time, and they are forms. And so literally mathematical truths are forms for Plato. And then if you ask Descartes, he's like, well, yeah, that idea of the forms is kind of wacky, but every rational mind has fundamental innate ideas built into the structure of reason. So the very structure of rationality itself implicitly contains timeless, eternal truths. We're going to call those innate ideas. And some of the most important among those are exactly the truths of math and geometry. And so, like Eric was saying, that this evident, and also logic, the truths of logic and so on. So the evident eternality, changeless character of these kinds of truth has always been a booger for Western philosophy, and people have come up with these different ways of trying to explain why. And he's looking at this whole tradition, and then he's looking at Hume, and Hume's like, yeah, they are actually a priori, but he just kind of, I don't know, in my impression, he just kind of wrings his hands and kind of goes, yeah, doesn't really answer the question. But Kant he's giving us an answer for why that's the case. I mean, and then, with regard to the lawfulness of nature, I think, I don't know, Tori or Eric or somebody else correct me. I think what Hume would say is it appears to be lawful, but we really have we can't assign necessity to that. So, when Hume talks about necessary connection, that necessary connection is something felt in the mind, in the empirical mind. It's purely because of habit. So the reason I feel like cause and effect is a necessary connection. There's no metaphysical basis for making that claim. It's simply that once I see things happen a bunch of times, my mind automatically begins to anticipate the next event, the effect from the cause. And that habit becomes so powerful that I feel in my mind a sense of necessity. But there is no real necessity. It's a psychological feeling. And Kant wants to say, no, it's not. Newtonian mechanics, the necessity of the lawfulness of nature is not based upon habitual human psychological states. It's real in a kind of fundamental sense. And so that's why, when we're saying, well, he's definitely not saying everything is subjective. the whole point in some sense of transcendental subjectivity is to show that there are real objective truths. Sorry for the for the occasional sermons. I still don't understand that problem, but I'm going to let it go for now and hope that maybe when it festers in the back of my mind, it'll, the pus will come out and I'll understand it. Or
Are you still talking about the one with like time and space?
yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about it and like what you were saying earlier about being like in a sensory deprivation chamber, right? Like even if you don't have any sense of space, like how could you not have a sense of time? Right? So kind of just applying to like what you were questioning earlier, like space encompasses all appearance, even if there's no outer appearance. But when you do have outer appearance, it encompasses that as well.
See, this that second part that that I have trouble with, because I have, again, it's easy for me to relatively easy for me to believe, okay, let's see, my temporal sense, I definitely have an intertemporal sense, maybe even if I had no external sense, and I definitely have an outer spatial sense. Yeah, no question. But then why do I have an outer temporal sense? This is where I get, and Eric tried to help me out by talking about the stream of consciousness and that kind of stuff, but I don't know, it's still not. But I'm willing to let that go and hope, like Eric suggested, I think that maybe there'll be some things he says later that might help. Rarely do I get all my questions answered on a first read of anything, in philosophy anyway.
I never get that.
Yeah, I virtually never do either. I read the Nicomachean Ethics now, like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. The first time I read it, it made no damn sense.
I'm curious, did you guys find it clarifying or confusing when he started distinguishing between sensible intuition, the kind of intuition that we have as finite subjects, and then intellectual intuition?
It threw me at first, but then I saw he was talking about God. And it was clarifying because it was building off of the thing in itself, or attaching it to a transcendental.
I think one of my difficulties, sorry to keep talking, but one of my difficulties is that because I'm not God, I don't have intellectual intuition. So it's hard for me to really, I don't really understand what that means. I have a hard time knowing what it would, like, what would it mean to have intellectual intuition?
So the way he's saying is that we have the kind of we have sensibility, we have only sensible discursive intuition. So for us, for a subject to think an object, that object is already not the subject, and the subject doesn't determine whole cloth what the object will be, but something of it is given to the subject. It's not fully constituted by the subject. We have no choice in the matter, right? And this is also, I mean, if you look back on his comments on inner sense, he's making this point, right? When we reflect inwardly on our emotions and our states, it's not always a construction or a projection of the mind. It's something we just discover in ourselves. I'm angry. I don't even know why. You know what I mean? Now I have to think about it and dig down, like what's going on underneath all of this. It's a matter so what he's kind of saying here with inner sense is that ourselves is a matter of discovery. as well, right? And it's given to us. It's not completely constructed. The existence of it isn't constructed in the thought of it. Whereas God's intellectual intuition, right, doesn't even need to think it. Like it comes into being at the moment that it, that the thing occurs. You know what I mean? Unicorn, boom, unicorn exists. You know what I mean? It's like because God intuits it, it exists. And God has this eternal perspective outside space and time, can recognize the thing without his mediated relation. We, on the other hand, are finite subjects. We're trapped within space and time. We're not able to attain an eternal perspective. So everything is mediated by our form of sensibility.
So there's no passive component if you had intellectual intuition.
Right. That's right. Yeah. There's no. Yeah. That's right. There's. Yeah.
So, like the in human, like, so in my experience, there's like an active aspect of my experience, which has to do with the way transcendental conditions structure my experience. But then there's a passive aspect where the stuff comes in that those structures process. Whereas if you had purely intellectual intuition, it would be, you would just have that active structure.
Right. That's right. Everything would be exactly how you determined it because you determined it that way without a reality principle outside of you to check you in any sense, you know? Yeah, that's right, Joey. Non-discursive intuition.
And so what exactly is discursive?
A judgment, so intuition that's, or thinking, thought that's formed from a judgment of predicating upon a subject. Kant thinks that this is, all of our experience is at root possible because we can form discursive judgments about objects given to us, but they're not entirely, not wholly given to us, or as insofar as they're given to us, they're only given to us according to the forms that we can receive them. So we can't get away from the subjectivity of it, can't conceive of it in itself, but nonetheless, we take it as given to us, not entirely of our making.
I guess there's another thing. I'll wait till we get to later in the book, but I'm curious, does he say my experience is based on judgment or only knowledge? Or anyway,
Yeah, so this is part of the thing is that some of the terminology starts to shift a little bit. Transcendental conditions for any judgment, or transcendental conditions for any experience whatsoever, or it starts, the transcendental conditions for any object or any judgment of an object or any experience whatsoever. He kind of shifts a little bit between them, right? But again, it's part of the transitionary nature of the work. I think it's still largely coherent. But if you wanted to be super anal and splice, this is where a lot of arguments might
well, he developed it over a 10-year period, so, and it's damn complicated.
Eric, Carmen asked if transcendental apperception, or if Kant thinks of transcendental apperception in a similar way as he thinks of freedom. I want to say not quite. Transcendental apperception is like the thing in itself that we are, that we can't know. So it's like behind experience. So I think maybe I want to say that he's more certain of transcendental apperception than he is of freedom. Is he more agnostic about freedom and then just says that it's necessary for morality, so we should think of ourselves as free?
Yes. So there's a kind of the synthetic unity of a perception is something that is arrived at through a transcendental analysis, saying there must be some X as a logical function, which holds all of these experiences together as a unified experience for a unified subject. And so he thinks that we can say something transcendentally, what must be the case for experience? There must be a self persisting. We don't intuit this self, but we can reason transcendentally there must be a self. And we can't say that there must be freedom. We'll get to freedom as well. When freedom is an idea with a capital I. It's a regulative idea that something reason can employ, but there's no way that we can say that it exists in the way we must say there must be something unifying all my experience. That must exist, right? There must be something underneath all my experience that unifies it together. Yeah, that's right. In the context of the first critique, the synthetic unity of a perception ends up being a necessary condition, whereas freedom is not it's a necessary condition for a coherent morality, if we want to do that in the second critique, but the status of it in the first critique is freedom is by no means necessary. It's an idea that reason invents. But there is also a relationship to be drawn. When we look to the synthetic unity of a perception, he makes a lot about spontaneity.
Kant seems like maybe he was really nice. Even when he's like trashing philosophers, he's like, oh, poor guy. He couldn't help but think this. Like when he's talking about Hume's radical skepticism. You don't get that a lot at conferences.
What? There's conferences?
Well, philosophy conferences, yeah.
Oh. Where? I want to go to one.
They're everywhere, honestly. UT has a few a year. Doesn't even have to be necessarily a conference. They also have symposiums, and they're generally open to the public. Actually, Matt Bauer was here over the summer for the Southwest conference. He had a nasty spill. He fell. We had to call EMS.
Eesh.
Yeah, hit his head pretty hard he got really lucky. His head landed he passed out, but his head landed on a tile that had dirt on it. And it was the only tile with dirt on it. Otherwise, could have been much, much worse. But he's good. I kept in touch with him. He's good.
So in other words, don't go to conferences.
I guess if that's your takeaway.
I went to a few years ago, but every year I can't remember the name of the organization. There's a New Mexico and Texas Philosophical Society or something, and they have a conference every year, and it varies. Sometimes it's in New Mexico, sometimes it's in Texas. But I don't think there's any cost to going. I mean, you have to transportation stuff, but I think you can just show up and listen to people's presentations. Since I don't keep up with that, I don't know where the next one is.
Yeah, well, they just restarted the Southwest
Oh,
Conference.
is okay.
It's it used to, it's been shut down for 2 years, but um it's a continental conference, which is really cool. This last one was all about Heidegger. You probably would have enjoyed it.
By the way, hopefully everyone realizes this. My difficulty, it's not a criticism of Kant. I'm not implying at all that he has a problem. It's completely, I don't understand it, but uh, n no claim at all that he has a problem there. So, Eric, is there anything else that we should think about? Or anybody else have any?
I
At
mean,
least,
it's vast, Nevitt, but I'm just going to process this. I'm just more excited that I found out that there's conferences. Like, I'm going to go to one. It'll be fun. But no, I don't know. I think I need to process a little bit.
Yeah, I'm pretty fried. I read too much of this today.
Yep, hard same. What, Tori, is this like, what am I getting into here if I go to a philosophy conference? Is this going to be somewhere I'm like, oh my God, what have I done?
I
Like,
mean, I imagine that attending and not presenting anything actually probably is awesome because there's nobody to like tear you down. It's a lot of my experience of philosophy conferences is going and then having people like rip your work to shreds and make you feel bad and not in a very nice way. And it's like good, it's productive for the process of like writing something, but a lot of what you take to a conference is like work in progress stuff. But going to them is perfectly fine. A lot of them serve alcohol too, so there's that. You just have drinks and go to talks all day. That sounds great, actually. Just don't present anything at philosophy conferences and you'll be fine.
is
Tori, it's not just philosophy conferences. That happens in political science and international relations conferences. I had my mentor in anthropology. His mentor would go to conferences, but everybody knew if you wanted to talk to him, go to the hotel bar. That's where he held court multiple days in a row. He just, and that's where you'd find him, and you'd have great conversations, and you could talk to him about what you were working on. But he never bothered going to any paper conferences. He just let everybody know he was at the hotel bar and held court for a while.
Yeah, I think that's a universal experience. Um, Getting drunk at the conference hotel bar is like a rite of passage.
just
Yeah,
before
how are you able to know that that's a universal experience, right?
Fair enough.
drinking is a transcendental condition for the possibility
There's something a priori, all right, the drinking.
Jason, you're getting into some like intersubjectivity, like analytical bullshit. Get out of here.
I still had some acting spirits to release, so I jumped at the opportunity to it.
Okay. I've only been to tech conferences where they just like present something and then everybody asks questions and like, yeah, maybe it's just like a philosophy conference. Everyone like wants to like, I guess, tech peacock and one up each other and show they know what they're talking about. But okay. All right. Now I learn. Still learn. Okay.
If nobody has any other comments on, well, I just, I guess I put it in the chat already, but yeah, who doesn't like getting drunk with strangers in a hotel lobby? It's a good time. It's always a good time, and especially when it's free. Because in my thing it was free IPAs. But that aside, we were talking just a little bit ago about logical versus Transcendental, and Joey gave like the pinpoint citation to be 61 to 62, and actually that just I was looking that over, and I saw one of my questions that I just before we end out here. It's the last 20 minutes. If have we talked about this already? Kant's use of the word right in this weird section on B60 to 62. I because I know that I mean if we already covered it or like something, because I know I missed a week and I was also spaced out just now for like 5 minutes at a random point. I was doing something. So if we had already cleared this up, but I don't know, maybe not. I feel like I've been pretty locked in. So I mean, I don't know. Trust myself. In B60, before getting into the Leibnizian Wolfian philosophy that directed all investigations of the nature and origin, blah blah blah. That is important and was germane to what we were talking about just recently. But right before that, there's this like there's this big paragraph, this big long paragraph, B61 to 62, where Kant tries to give this like illustration or explanation for that our entire sensibility is nothing but the confused representation of things, blah blah blah, is therefore a falsification of the concept of sensibility and of appearance that renders the entire theory of them useless and empty. What I thought he was going to do in this paragraph was that he would do the standard thing he does all the time, which is like it's not all it is all appearance, but that doesn't mean it's illusion because it's objectively valid and objective validity is do 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 do. I've got that. I get it. I understand. I get the difference between objective reality and transcendental ideality, or at least I have an understanding of it that I think I understand. I'm pretty sure I've got that. All right, that's not my confusion. But I thought that's where he was going. I thought he was going to be like, okay, just another objective validity, transcendental ideality, but he doesn't. He ends that sentence and then he immediately jumps into this kind of thing that I just, what point is he making here? The difference between an indistinct and a distinct representation is merely logical, and there's not concern the content. I get that. But then, without doubt, the concept of right that is used by the healthy understanding contains the very same things that the most subtle speculation can evolve out of it. Only in common and practical use, one is not conscious of these manifold representations in these thoughts. So this got me thinking. I was like, so like it's like not something where it's like you need synthetic thought to get things out of or something. Thus, one cannot say that the common concept is sensible and contains a mere appearance. For right cannot appear at all. Rather, its concept lies in the understanding and represents a constitution of actions that pertains to them in themselves. The representation of a body and intuition, on the contrary, contains nothing at all that pertain to an object in itself. The appearance is something in the way in which we are affected by it. So like that's fine, I guess. Is he just like illustrating the difference between an internal like experience of like the note, like a sort of recognition of a concept of right versus an external recognition of like a body in space? Why would he make that point? What is it? What you know what I mean? Right there, it seems it's odd. Also, Nevitt makes a good point. It might be the case that this is all kind of that this whole section is directed at, or is sort of in a way a sort of indirect response to Leibnizian Wolfian conceptions of space and time that my lack of familiarity with might be what makes this Greek to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm assuming the same is true for me. What I was wondering, what I was asking Eric is, do would it either be helpful or do we in fact need to understand something about Leibniz and Wolff in order to make sense of what Kant's doing? Because I mean, I think I have at least a basic idea of what the Newtonian notion of absolute space means, but this Leibnizian relative space, I don't, and I have no idea. I have never read anything by Wolff, so I mean, is it just are these just critiques that he's kind of saying, yeah, these guys got it wrong, or do we need to understand what they were doing in order to understand what he's doing?
I get the sense he's a one-hit wonder. I say we don't focus much time on
No, the way you posed it there, Nevin, you gave us an or, and I wanted to say both, right? Like
Hmm.
he's disputing the Leibnizian Wolffian conception of space, right? With regard to this distinction between distinct and indistinct formation of space or time. I want to say that Leibniz and Wolff want to say of it that the reason can form a distinct concept. And this is not germane to Kant's purpose of demonstrating that space and time are not concepts in the first instance, but forms of intuition. And
So
then
it's
by analogy, he's reaching to the concept of right. But the analogy would be relating it to what Leibniz and Wolff were doing with the concept of space.
the impression I got, and I could be completely wrong, but when he was talking about that, because I've never read those guys, but talking about the distinct versus indistinct, so maybe here's an illustration.
You
So
don't know the monads? What? What? Do you even monad, bro?
yeah, that's still fuzzy in my mind, but if you know if you look at, let's say I look at I don't know, some organic substance like a chunk of meat or something, and I I mean, I kind of know what's in there, but then if I start looking through a microscope, I see a clearer view of what it is, but and then the more I focus, the clearer I get. I mean, were they saying contra Kant that the thing in itself really is, quote, there. It's just that because we have a confused perception of things, we don't see it as it is, but it really is. There isn't anything in itself that is inaccessible in principle to human experience. The problem, the difference is just a matter of we don't have a clear perception of it. Is that because again, I'm guessing, I don't know.
I don't think the object is the thing in itself. I think the object is space.
Oh, so they're just talking just about space?
I think Leibniz and Wolff are saying we can have a clear and distinct rational conception of space. It's not absolute, it's relational, it's object dependent, and he's kind of beefing with that. No, it's not a concept. It's an intuition. It's a form of intuition.
And do you know what he means by relational? Because what those guys mean, does it mean that like space arises as a relation among physical objects, something like that?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. In order, yeah.
So I guess for Newton, you have like this, I think of it as a giant space-time box that is just there, regardless of whether objects or not, and you
Right.
can kind of throw objects into it.
That's right.
Whereas would Leibniz and Newton say something like, there is no space, but now you have objects, and now space is the relationship between those objects, or something like
Yeah,
that.
there's no space to speak of if there are no objects in space to draw relationships between, right? So space is just the relationships that we find between objects. And if we don't find objects, then what relationships are you talking about?
Hmm.
But remember, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, Leibniz is having issues with Newton. I mean, he's pre-Kantian.
That's
So,
right.
I mean, Kant has the benefit of both Leibniz and Newton, where Newton and Leibniz were arguing, to a certain extent, arguing with each other, or at least Leibniz was arguing with Newton.
Leibniz is, yeah, he was arguing with indirectly with Newton. It was Clark. Was it Samuel Clark? I forget his first name. His name was Clark, right? Clark. As Newton's representative.
Right.
And yeah, Kant disagrees with both. In the same way that he disagrees with the rationalist and the empiricist tradition, but finds a little bit of both to marry together. He's kind of disagreeing with both Leibniz and Newton here.
So
Yeah.
Eric, I was gonna go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sound like you had a serious comment.
Joey said, or just sort of as as maybe it's the case that concept is not a refining of distinction as what is given in sensibility. Eric, if I remember, based on a conversation we had last semester, you, and maybe this doesn't address this question, but Kant would say we do have empirical concepts, right, that are based on experience.
That's
So
right.
you experience a bunch of things that look the same, and then you abstract, to use the way Nietzsche talks about, abstract the differences, and now you have a concept of a leaf or a chair or something.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, nearly all the concepts that you can think of as concepts are going to be recognized as empirical concepts. And then we have the pure concepts. And then what might people, I mean, today, I guess a lot of people would call freedom a concept. That's not a concept, that's an idea. But tables, chairs, water bottles, the concept of water bottle is a purely empirical, not say purely empirical, an empirical concept.
And we construct new empirical concepts as, yeah.
Right.
Is
Do
it
concepts necessarily need an object?
Concepts without intuition are empty.
Right. And I think like that's kind of the difference between concept and object. I mean, I'm sorry, concept and idea, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Ideas don't have a sensible object.
huh?
Got it.
Is God an example of an idea?
God is an idea. Freedom is an idea.
So ideas are either bullshit or like regulative.
That's right. Posits by reasons positing regulative principle.
Either bullshit or regulative is going in my notes.
What?
What type of keyboard do you have, Mario? Is it a Veritas?
No, I wish. It's just a shitty Apple keyboard.
Oh. That's spring release.
So Carmen asked about necessary conditions and then morality and freedom. So Eric, again, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but in the Critique of Pure Reason, I think he's claiming he has deduced the necessary conditions for the conditions that are necessary in order to have the kind of experience we have, and he's deduced those, and they are necessary in the hard sense. Like this is B64 at the bottom of 97 in the Blue Heart edition. Our second important concern in this transcendental aesthetic is that it should not merely gain some favor as a plausible by hypothesis, but should be certain and indubitable as can possibly be demanded of a theory that is to serve as an organon. And so I think in the metaphysical work of a Critique of Pure Reason, he's making a claim that these things are, it seems to me he's saying indisputably necessary. But then in the Critique of Practical Reason, where he's talking about morality and freedom and stuff like that, he's a bit more tentative. Like, I mean, if you're gonna, I don't know, I'll put it the way I think of it, and then Eric can tell me that I'm wrong. I think of it that, if we hold, when we make moral judgments, we hold people responsible. And we think of morality as being reasonable and rationally defensible. And if you want to make those kinds of claims, if morality, if people, if it makes sense to hold people responsible for their actions, and if morality is going to be reasonable, rational, then on those assumptions, there are certain necessary conditions, transcendental conditions for morality. But I don't get it's not, I mean, I think you don't get any kind of if this, if that, at least in the critique of pure reason, it's like, look, I'm showing you, if experience is like this has got to be what is the case. And experience is like this. Given that this is what our experience is like, this other stuff just flat has to be true. The whole book. Whereas in the ethics, it's like, well, if you wanna say that morality is rational, and if you want to be able to hold people responsible for their actions, well, then this stuff has to be true. But if you denied those two things, I think, and maybe some other stuff, Kant would be like, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, really, you don't think that holding people responsible for their actions, there's no point to that? I mean, really? But he can't prove that. He can't.
Yeah, we're
Go
not
ahead.
gonna, yeah, you can't prove the existence of freedom, right? It's already just presupposed in our practical activity. But it's actually, I mean, again, it's practical activity. Our theoretical, our practical activity is already presupposed in our theoretical activity. So if we're going to have Newton's physics, then these things must be true. If we're going to have a science of morality, then these things must be true. And really, between the two modes of theoretical and practical reason, it's practical reason which has priority.
But there are people who will dispute whether morality is a science in his sense. And there are people who would dispute that you have to have hard metaphysical freedom in order to make sense of morality. So,
oh yeah, totally. Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, there's always been people disputing the concept of freedom. There's always been people afraid of responsibility.
or people that can say you can ground responsibility on the fact that humanity is not omniscient and we don't know what the future is going to hold. And so responsible in the sense of this person has been acting this way. We see a trend in their behavior. They are therefore a danger to us. And so therefore we're going to prevent them from doing anything like this in the future because we don't know. We're not God. We don't know what they're going to do in the future. So you can make claims about a rational morality that still does not depend on a strong sense of metaphysical freedom.
Yeah, and again, it depends on what we mean by metaphysical freedom, right? It's not, again, Kant is very, like, we don't, like, as far as a scientific theoretical thing that exists that science can discover, no. Like, same with God. You know what I mean? We don't need God for morality. I guess we need for the motivation, but not for the justification. We don't need God for Newton's physics.
But there's people who say you don't need it for morality either. You don't need God nor transcendental freedom for morality to make sense. So those are not indisputable claims that Kant makes. Eric and I have an ongoing argument about this. Sorry, won't drag you into the abyss. If Chase was here, he would be like, fight, 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 fight.
Yeah, I just want to redirect it. We don't need to keep going back to the horns on the fourth antinomy. You know what I mean? Like the second critique just kind of starts from a completely different line of inquiry. So we're not trying to prove something that he says we can't prove in the first critique in order to even get started with the second critique. That would be a gross inconsistency. He'd have to be very ashamed.
Well, we have managed to consume a couple of hours. Any last burning questions or even not burning questions or comments? I want to know who the woman is in Joseph's picture.
Oh, Filipina foot.
Is that right?
Yeah,
I have never seen a picture of her.
yeah. I
Why
try
is
to
she
dig
not
it up every.
controlling?
What's that? Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. Good Lord. I'm with you. I get so irate when people mention that. I'm like, this is not justify teleological ethics. It's brought it's brought up to show like in the inconsistencies in it.
I learned that she was friends with Anscombe.
Yeah, 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 she was.
And I learned recently that Anscombe had a real beef with Truman getting an honorary award from Oxford, honorary degree from Oxford.
Yeah. If you
He's
ever
a
want a good
master.
biography on the history of women in philosophy, there's one called "The Women Are Up to Something." It's I think it was written
Right.
about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. It's very good. Very
It was
excellent.
those two. It was Anscombe and Foote. They were up to something.
Yeah, definitely. Carrying and moving forward philosophy and unrecognized and providing the scaffolding for the institution of pedagogy to continue. So, aka women.
Those damn uppity women. Don't worry, my wife slaps me around when I say things like that. I don't know. Eric, can you say anything like in 2 minutes about the distinction between appearance and illusion, or is that going to come up more again later?
Yes, especially when he gets to the discussion of transcendental illusion. Um, illusion again, when mistaken judgments, when we take things in our experience to be the thing in itself, right? When we forget that we're subjects and intuiting objects that aren't us, and those objects must be somehow amenable to our way of intuiting it, so that there's a mediation. When we forget about that mediation and skip over it, right? There's illusion, right? But it doesn't, when we remember the mediation, we get appearance.
I think one of the terminological difficulties with Kant is his, again, I don't know, and I don't know what other word he would use, but appearance, that word gives people the impression that, like he says, this is an appearance, and that gives people the impression he's saying that this isn't real, that it's illusory in some sense, but that's not what he means. I mean, he
Right.
calls himself, and Eric's convinced me. I mean, I thought Kant was just being sneaky, but he's convinced me, no, he really is an empirical realist. This is a real book. There is no other book. This is the real book. But it's an appearance in the sense that it appears to our experience. So I think when Plato talks about the phenomenal world, and it's a Greek word, phenomena, and the word literally means the appearances. It's what appears to the senses. For Plato, there was a more real world, the forms, but I think, this is the real world, or maybe I should be careful, like Eric said, this is the actual world. This is an actual book. And so it's not an appearance in the sense that it's some kind of illusion or not fully real or anything like that. No, that's the real book there. He's an empirical. I mean, it's one of the interesting thing. You've got to buy the whole transcendental thing, which is difficult for some people. But one of the fascinating things about Kant, which I think is you see his sort of proto-phenomenological uh, stance, is that it provides a way of finessing the mind world distinction. With Descartes, you've got this mind and this world that are forever cut off from one another. They're tied together with a little tether of some kind, but they're just how do things out there in the world get in here in the mind? And Kant finesses that. This is the real world. I mean, it really is. It's the empirically real world. So it's not like this is like for Hume and for Descartes, this would be a mental image. Well, for Descartes, this would be a mental image of something in my mind that is we hope, relatively accurate copy of a real thing in a physical world that is not in my mind. So you've got the image in the mind and you've got the thing in the world. But for Kant, there's no distinction like that. This is the real thing. And so he provides a really interesting way to to deal with that problem. And I guess some of you guys who know phenomenology better than me could disagree, but I think phenomenology takes takes that general sense from Kant and saying, this mind world fracture is not really a thing. That's you're setting up the problem in an artificial way when you make that radical distinction. So
you can't have an unbridgeable gulf, right? Like, how do you know things? How do you experience things if objects are wholly heterogeneous to mind?
I know the bell just rang, but can I ask a question?
yes.
So that was kind of the impression that I got from most of it, is like what you're saying. It's like there is a real thing. We don't know exactly what it's really like, but we have this idea of what it's like, and maybe it's kind of like what it's like, right? But then in that B59, he's talking about if we annul ourselves as the subject. He says, then this entire character of objects and all their representations in space and time, indeed even space and time themselves, would vanish. Being appearances, they cannot exist in themselves, but can only exist in us. So he kind of elaborates, and it doesn't seem that so much this way anymore, but that phrase out of context kind of feels like he's saying nothing is real, which felt really out of character and kind of threw me off. I don't know if he's like kind of being hyperbolic or why he's saying that they don't exist all of a sudden, but I was just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I think that depends again on the difference between empirical and transcendental subjectivity. So I mean, this is another, I'll put it this way. In my opinion, this is a big mistake. Sometimes people think, well, the things in themselves are the real things. Those are that's the real world is the world of things in themselves. And then this is a mere appearance, a mere kind of an illusion that is a inaccurate copy of the real thing in the world. But I don't think that's what Kant's saying. He's saying this is the real book. The thing in itself is it's a mental construct that we use to be able to talk about the fact that the only possible experience we can have is things as they are conditioned by transcendental subjectivity. And so the thing in itself is not the real thing. The thing in itself is I mean, you just think about it. The word thing implies a substance, a thing that exists. But a substance is one of the ways that the mind constructs our experience of the empirical world. So the thing in itself cannot be a thing. But what else is he going to call it? And so you have to use, so the thing in itself is, the way Eric has talked to me about it, it is a limiting condition. It is that which we cannot access, but it's not the real thing. It's the things in themselves are among that stuff that are conditions for the possibility of us having this kind of experience. And so, at least my way of thinking about things in themselves, like we were talking about earlier, you've got the mind has these structuring principles, space, time, and some more we'll hear about later, that provide structure and form to our experience. And then you have the manifold of sensation, which just kind of smacks our, kind of impinges upon these structuring principles. And those structuring principles then render that experienceable. But that my way of thinking about the things in themselves are just a way of talking about where the hell did that manifold of sensation come from? What is the quote origin of the passive data that the mind has to process? But it's just it's like a boundary condition. It's Let's see, I think actually Tristan's not here anymore. In the 19th century class one time, he described Kant as saying you're inside this coffee cup and you're trying to find out what the boundaries of your experience are. And when you've figured out what those boundaries are, you can't get past them. And so the things in themselves is just a way of talking about what's on the other side of the cup, on the other side of the boundary. But it's not the real world. It's just whatever it is that gives rise to real experience. So in spite of his words like, when he said, when he says things like, uses words like appearance and those kinds of words, I think he's just calling attention to the fact that everything we experience is conditioned by our modes of cognition. That's all that means. It's not saying there is some more real world beyond our modes of cognition.
That's what he's trying to disabuse us of, right? I want to say, like, I think from the Kantian perspective, right? It is perfectly natural in our experiences to recognize that we make mistakes in our perception, in our judgment. We are subject to hallucination and illusions. Our subjectivity kind of distorts or colors or changes things. Wouldn't it be great if we could just take all that subjectivity and strip it away and just get the object as it is in itself without any relationship to an object or a subject whatsoever? Then we'll get to the real objectivity, the real truth, the reality. Reality is what happens when you take away the subject. That was the paradigm up to this point, right? And then Kant is like, that's something that, again, reason posits because we have these experiences of making mistakes in our judgment. So we want to imagine what's it like? What would it be apart from a subject? And that's what philosophy's been trying to do, is come to an adequate knowledge of objects to bring the subject adequate to the object as the object is apart from the subject. That's, right here, like the Copernican turn. No, it comes, it's always amenable to the subject in some sense. There is no knowledge. There's no experience. There's nothing that you can talk about being real at all when you take away a subject.
You can already see phenomenology starting to poke through.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Husserl wrote a book, Transcendental Idealism, and Being in Time is all the time talking about the condition of possibility for this kind of experience or this kind of meaning. This is, Husserl and Heidegger are just further in the same tradition.
In the one time or a couple times I taught phenomenology and existentialism, and the first time, I don't remember if Husserl uses these exact words, but he says things like, without consciousness, there is no world. And there was a student in there who got so frustrated by that. And, me and other students were trying to explain what that meant that he finally just, after a couple of weeks, he ditched the class. But the thing is, what would a world be absent consciousness? Just try to think about what that would be. So imagine, so if you right now try to imagine a world that is not dependent on consciousness, and you're like, well, sure, I can do that. No, you didn't. because the very fact that you are imagining that world means there is a consciousness there imagining it. So, I mean, I don't think, yeah, exactly, that's right. The bottle not in the brain. Um, you you know, you can talk abstractly about a world. It's I don't think, like, Husserl's not what was that called, a subjective idealist that says that the consciousness literally manufactures the world. In some attenuated sense, you can say the world exists absent consciousness, although that word exist is, you're abusing the word, because the very word existence only has meaning for conscious beings who experience existence. So as soon as you say what would the world be without consciousness, you're talking nonsense, because the word be only has meaning for conscious entities. And so the notions of being and existence and these sorts of things, they just don't have any meaning. They're nonsense outside the contemplation of a conscious being. And so in that sense, there is no world without consciousness, like Husserl would say. World in the sense that we use the word world. I mean, maybe there's, quote, something, but even something that's an abuse of the language, because you couldn't say anything about it. And I mean, that's very similar to what Kant's saying with regard to things in themselves. You can say that. You can say things in themselves, like you can say the world absent consciousness, but it's really just a way of talking about something we can't really make any sense of. It's trying to talk about a boundary that beyond which we simply cannot penetrate, cannot, not are not currently able to, in principle, cannot and never will.
Kind of a catch-22, because if you wanted to know the thing in itself, you'd have to not exist, and then you couldn't know it.
Yes, that's another way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thrust of this first critique, is to establish boundaries on what we can claim and what we can't claim. And what's off the table is the eternal perspective. So specie eternitatis. We can't claim anything from that perspective. There's Strawson, one of the big names in analytic. Not the one who's currently at UT, but his father, who is a bigger name than the one who's currently at UT. Wrote a famous book called The Bounds of
Strawson?
PF?
Strawson?
Yeah,
P.F.
yeah.
Strawson and Galen
That's right.
Strawson, the son?
Galen is at UT.
Yes.
PF was his father.
Yes.
PF wrote a famous book. He was reviving Kant in the analytic tradition.
Yes, I believe
was-
so.
There was always a bit of a Kantian legacy. He was making it explicit. And
Yes.
saying a lot of this is good, a good chunk of it we can ignore. But the important thing is bounds of sense. That's the title of his book, right? Kant tells us what we can know is already circumscribed within the boundaries of what we can sense. And this is already, yeah, this goes against the grain of all the traditional metaphysics that's prior to Kant. I and others think that Strawson doesn't have the best reading of Kant, but he is making that important point.
We
An
made it.
analytic professor not having the best reading of a
Yeah,
continental.
that's right. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. But I mean, I'll give him credit. He was bringing
Right.
attention to some good stuff. He was just in a milieu of people that were really not hearing any Germans. He had to be very forceful and persuasive just to bring a German back to the table.
Okay. Any other last comments or questions?
No, we made it 16 minutes past 9. Good session.
I apologize for holding forth so much. I can't promise I won't do it, but I'll try to, I don't know. Anyway, You know, it's that professor thing. You stand and you lecture for hours a day, and then it's hard to shut it off.
Everything tonight was very, very helpful.
Great questions. Okay, what are you? Oh, he's just drinking water. I was going to ask what Joy. I thought he had maybe a nice dark beer there, but no, just boring. I don't know. Maybe vodka. Could be vodka. I don't know.
Put it in your head, Joey.
I'll indicate also that the transcendental aesthetic is very important. And then this first section here of the transcendental logic that we're going to be starting, like the next two readings are also very important. Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel especially make a lot out of the more than the transcendental aesthetic. They come into this first section, this first part of the transcendental logic, and make more out of this than the other parts. So it's very important and very exciting. I like I like the whole, synthetic unity of perception, the table of categories. He starts to lay down some things that are just characteristic of the rest of his thinking, the rest of his system. So that I'll point it out more explicitly, but the table of categories actually reappears in a different form in the second critique and the third critique. So he starts dropping some really heavy pillars of Kantianism in the next section.
Okay, with that teaser, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, be safe.